So now we've got to the most exciting part of the show when we're going to taste the wines. And before I do want to talk about Jeremy's amazing book, which I've read. It comes in this beautiful packaging. And if you're thinking of a really good idea for a totally unique gift for someone who loves wine, I bet no one's had a book on Maltese wine before. And I think there are some beautiful pictures in here. And Jeremy, you would be willing to sign the books, right?
Absolutely, yes.
If people order it online, I can't find the picture I found earlier, but it is a beautiful book. And if you order it online on the Marsovin website, there's a place where you can comment. And if you put a comment saying, could Jeremy please sign it to so-and-so, or Merry Christmas to so-and-so, I'm sure Jeremy will do this. And it's a great book. How much is it, by the way? Do you know?
If I'm not mistaken, it's about 50 euros.
50 euros. Well, it is a nice gift packaging type of book, so that's well worth it. And
yes,
someone gave me that book, as you very kindly have.
Yes.
I would be thrilled to have such a unique book in my library, because you can't find much on wine in Malta.
There isn't much, and each book is numbered as well, so we only made a few, not too many of them, let's put it that way.
Now, equally beautiful packaging is your bottle. This is, which wine are we going to drink? I haven't even opened it. I wanted to save it for today because it's such a beautiful packaging. Everything is so high quality so far. I'm hoping the wine is too. I'm sure it is. Here it is.
I hope not to disappoint.
Yeah, again, this would be a good gift too, but it's more difficult to ship wine, especially to America. Look at that. So tell us about this wine. I'm going to be opening this wine, so you can tell us about it whilst I'm opening it.
Well, this is a wine. As you can see, it's called Primus. Primus meaning first in Latin. Why did we call it that? We called it that because it was the first wine of its kind made in Malta from an indigenous variety, which we've just mentioned earlier on, Gelosa, a bit of a tongue twister as a word. So I'll repeat it, Gelosa. And the Gelosa is our only indigenous Maltese red variety. It can't be found anywhere else in the world, only on our little island in Malta. What we do over here is that once we harvest the grapes, we then dry the grapes in the sun for a period of about 2.5 weeks, depending on weather conditions, where we're partially drying the grapes to improve the concentration of the grape. We do this, as I said, for 2.5 weeks. We also dry some Shiraz. We do that in a well-ventilated room. So the reason that we dry the Gelosa in the sun and the Shiraz in the room is that the Gelosa tends to have a thinner, more delicate skin, and it's more susceptible to humidity and the weather conditions, whereas the Shiraz has a thicker skin and can afford to even sustain a bit of humidity. Hence, it can be dried indoors. Now, because we're drying this in September, in Malta, it can get a little humid in September, not too bad. But if there's an odd spot of rain here and there, you risk losing all the crop. So what we do is that we dry the Gelosa in the sun, the Shiraz in a well-ventilated room. As a consequence, you get this more concentrated grape, naturally concentrated with the use of wind and sun. And you get, as a consequence, a much more full-bodied wine. So we'll see that shortly in the tasting. You can first defined by its intense deep purple color, which we will soon see. After obviously all the aspects of vinification, we then go into the aging process where we use American oak and we're using a French oak as well here. So we use a combination of both, a bit more American than French, due to the power of the wine. It's one of the few wines where we actually use American oak, due to the power that we feel that the American oak tends to match it a bit better. So it's part of the experience. We made the first vintage was in 2009, and since then we've been learning a lot more about the wine as years go past. Obviously, every year is a new discovery. We try to always improve on the wine as much as we can.
Well, I mean, you can't see, but my mouth is drooling now, salivating for this wine. Salivating. So we'll pour it.
I'll join you in that.
Oh, you're drinking it too. I didn't realize you were drinking it too.
We are.
Fantastic.
On the opposite side of the world and sharing the same wine.
I just, before I taste it, I just got to address this question. We will be getting to everyone's questions later, but this one I love because it's from Carola and Bill, the Step Up in the United States. And what cruise are you going to book and in what year? You have a following that would book the same cruise to be able to visit Marsovin Winery with you. Please advise. Thank you. Well, that's from Bill. Yes, Bill, I hope to visit the Marsovin Winery on a cruise with you and Carola and anyone else, and go to the winery to taste these with you in person, because it's awfully cruel to taste a wine like this when you can't actually taste it. You just have to rely on my opinion on this without having it. So let me see. I could have a white background for this. This is more or less good enough. Well, let's show you the color for a start. It's got a lovely deep color. It's completely full to the rim, and by that I mean, some wines you'll look at and it will have a watery rim, but in this case the color is completely full to the. It's a classic, beautiful sort of bluish purple, deep red, very deep, almost opaque. You can, by that, when I put my finger behind it, I can't really see my finger. It's not completely opaque, but it's almost opaque. This is a 2018 vintage, so it's understandably young, but it doesn't have that sort of pink purple rim that you get on very young wine. So it's looking like it's maturing nicely for being 3 years old. And let's smell this wine. I think that is fabulous. I think it's extremely distinctive. Apart from being full, having everything that you want quality-wise, because it's full, it's got rich, deep fruit, big fruit. It's got depth, persistence, but it's got a unique character to it, which I love. A pleasantly unique character. I don't know if this is it almost smells a little bit like it might be spritzy. It's got a little prickly on the nose. It's not, obviously not sparkly or prickly, but it's lively is what I'm trying to say. It's really lively. And if you, it makes me think of red currant jelly boiled up and served with Virginia ham type, proper ham. It's got that sort of, I love it because it's not just fruity, it's got much more depth to it, much more. There's a lot going on in this wine. Let's taste it. And usually at wine tastings, I spit the wines out, but I'm not going to today. I will if it's disgusting, but obviously it's not going to be, it's delicious on the nose. So I expect it to be delicious on the palate. I'm not going to spit this one out because I want to taste it. Wow. I'm seriously impressed with this. I was worried, and full disclosure to the viewers, this is the first time I've ever drunk a wine from Malta. So we did this show with me not really knowing what Maltese wines are like. I mean, I've done a lot of research, I've got a lot of knowledge, but I've never actually tasted a wine. And I was worried that, when you were talking earlier about the bell pepperiness on some of your wines, I was a little bit nervous that it wouldn't be the quality that we would hope it to be, and it is beyond the quality I expected and imagined and hoped it to be. It's really high quality.
Thank you.
It's full. It's got a fantastic texture. It's chewy. It's got amazing fruit, and you say the grape makeup on this is the Gelosa
and Shiraz. So you've got about 60-40.
60 Gelosa and 40 Shiraz.
And I think what's particularly interesting about this wine, having tasted them by themselves beforehand, it's the Shiraz really helps the Gelosa, and they obviously likewise the Gelosa helps the Shiraz. And it's what's going on between those two varieties that marry, in my opinion, very well in this wine.
I completely agree with you. I think obviously I've never had a Gelosa wine before. I don't know that grape. I know Shiraz extremely well, so I can see the Shiraz in it, but I can also identify the Gelosa character from what's making this Shiraz different from other Shirazes, and I like this wine a lot.
We incidentally, when talking again about the wine in a more generic nature, as a winery in Malta, going back to the 2000 era, 2010, prior to 2009, we never had a wine of significant character and quality that originated from Gelosa. And I always thought that coming into the winery in about 2002, I said to myself, well, we've got our indigenous variety, we're doing a lot with the international varieties, and so has everybody else around the world. Why aren't we doing anything with our own indigenous variety? And let's get to work trying a few things, experimenting here and there, a few trials. And 2009, we worked towards that, and we came out with this style, taking the sort of sun drying process, which is used a bit in Pantelleria, which they used to make their pastitos, and going as far as Veneto, where they use it for their amarones, where they dry in bamboo racks on the hills. And looking at that, we sent our winemaker to a renowned producer in Veneto, had a bit of a chat and spoke to them about what they did. We were given some very, very interesting advice and feedback, and came back, and we started this process of producing our own idea of a wine using the natural methods of drying of the sun and the wind. And as a consequence, in 2009, we came out with the first vintage. And obviously, we were very, very pleased with the result, because trying to do something and actually getting a good result is two different things. And I believe that it has, the Gelosa really shows out here in its unique character, so it would be identified, I think, amongst many wines as something which has a distinct character to its own personality. And then what I like also about it, in my opinion, is also the way that the oak adds these tertiary notes to the wine as well. So you get those bit of vanilla and a bit of cinnamon here and there coming through. So it doesn't, even though the oak needs to be powerful for a wine like this because of the concentration of the wine and the color and the depth, you can't, again, obviously go too far and then overpower something which is already very powerful. So that is something we had to get right over the years.
Just remind me, sorry, this wine, the oak regimen is what? Is French or American?
Mostly American and a little bit of French, so
80%
American.
What
No, but 80% American oak. So here we're using a bit of a Segam or Vicard, Bordeaux, Tonneries, and a tiny bit of French, so just to have a bit of diversity as well.
Sorry, and is it new oak and old oak?
It's all new oak.
All new oak. All new, 100% new oak. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that in the back of my mind I'm aware of is the length. I can still taste the wine, and you can time how long ago I took my last sip because you've been watching, but I can still taste it. It's got amazing length and aftertaste. For those of people who are really familiar of wines which are made in the way of drying out the grapes, I think that really shows through on this. And I think it's a classic example of, blends are generally more interesting than single varietal wines. So, Bordeaux is always a blend of 3 or 4 grapes. And I think this is a Shiraz with a load more interest than most Shirazes. It's got more complexity, more character. It's just a much more interesting wine. And I think it is distinctive enough that if you gave this to someone who's a good taster today, and then you gave it to them 5 years down the road with not exactly the same wine, but I think it's identifiable. Someone would say, yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the time when my father, there's a wine in France called Master de Mascassac, and Hugh Johnson, the wine writer in England, thought, he's finally got a wine that's going to stump my father in a blind tasting. And my father happened to have tasted it the day before, but Hugh Johnson didn't know that. And Hugh had it on the table, and my father looked at it without even picking it up and said, "That looks like Master de Mascassac." And Hugh was just completely overwhelmed by this. And but I think if someone gave this to me tomorrow, I wish I could play this trick on someone. I'd love to taste this today, and then have someone bring it to me tomorrow thinking I've never tasted such a wine before. To be able to say, "Oh, well, that's the Primus from Malta." It is distinctive enough that I would just, you can pick this out. Character-wise, it's got a lovely, to me, it's got a sort of lovely sort of smoky character to it. Mm-hmm. Almost autumnal. Sitting in a damp, cold English cottage in front of a fire with the smell of leaves and trees, and it brings back all those warm feelings that you get from a cozy little cottage and a fireplace and
some smoked gammon next to you.
Yeah, I'm sure in Malta you probably don't have the need for fireplaces and damp, cold cottages, but
I have one. I have 3 actually. So.
You have.
We have our cold moments as well, but there aren't too many to be fair. with a very warm climate almost all year round.
Mm. This is beautiful.
It's close to heart because it was my father had come up with many of the wines that we have in our selection in the last 15 years. This is one of the wines that I wanted to make. So it was one of the first things that I did when I joined the winery. And thankfully, it's been a local success. And at the time when we had launched it in Malta, we didn't know how the Maltese would ever really produce a wine of this style from the local variety. So we weren't even sure it would have a local uptake. And it had a bit of resistance internally from the family. But it was one of those things where I thought it was the right direction to take, and today it's quite sought after, and obviously we're obviously proud to have it as part of our sort of culture and the winery, that we're producing wines from indigenous varieties of a significant style and quality and character.
Yeah, and the wine has fantastic weight, and it's.
What I find particularly interesting is that we're looking at 15.5% alcohol here, and that I really find that that's quite hidden. So it doesn't feel like this hot wine of with a high percentage of alcohol. It's certainly there in the body, but it doesn't burn you in any way in terms of the finish. It's not a hot finish from the way I look at it.
Yeah.
I describe it as a fairly soft finish with a very slight lingering off dry finish, which is very slight, which in my opinion makes it all the more interesting, because I'll always look for a nice finish in a wine. I'm always very curious to see how the wine finishes. I think it's a very important aspect.
People who know me well know that I'm not a fan of high alcohol wines, but I've always said that a high alcohol wine can be balanced with the wine itself. This is a very balanced wine, very good quality wine. My objection to high alcohol is simply the fact that evolution hasn't caught up to our brains, to the winemaking. For instance, so the oldest wine I ever drank was from carbon dated 1670, and it was 6.5% alcohol. But basically, up until about the 1990s, almost all wines were 12.5% alcohol, maybe less, maybe a little bit more, but very few were 14% alcohol. And that's why we can, having been drinking wine, the human brain is used to wines which are 12% alcohol. So we can share a bottle of wine at 12.5% alcohol and still have room for something else afterwards, like a port. But because your brain is adapted to process 12.5% alcohol wine, you can have enough of it to go with a meal. But to get the same volume of intake that you need for hydration with a 15.5% alcohol wine, you're going to be drunk. So our brains, alcohol levels have gone up since the 1990s dramatically, and our brains haven't adapted to it yet. So the wine might be balanced, but our brains aren't. But that said, I do think this is a delicious wine, lovely, high quality, great wine. And if I didn't know it's from Malta, I was given it in a blind tasting, I'm not sure what I would say. It's a classic wine, which could be made in various places. But it's got elements of Amarone, elements of great Australian Shirazes. It's got elements of Bordeaux. It's got elements of, but then it's got that sort of uniqueness which comes from Gelosa grape, which could only be Malta. So comparing it to other regions is probably not the right thing to do, because it is a Maltese wine, and it's got its own definition and character.
Yes, one interesting factor which I didn't mention is that most of the vines in Malta are grown in a bush vine method, which is something which is still happening today, just like they do in Rioja and many other areas of the world.
I think when I saw pictures of that, and I wrote you an email saying it's like the wines from Itata and
yes, that's right,
Swartland. And I'm not sure that you knew what I meant by Itata and Swartland, but
I wasn't familiar with them, to be perfectly honest with you. And I looked it up after I sent the email. I said, "Oh, that's what he was referring to."
Yeah,
that
so
made
Itata,
perfect sense. Yes.
Itata is the original wine growing region of Chile and got abandoned, but those vines still exist as bush vines, and the same in Swartland, the biggest wine region in South Africa, which got abandoned too. And those bush vines, which have been discovered by young winemakers, and they're making stunning wines out of them. And obviously the bush vines in Malta are the older vines. So I imagine you're not planting any new bush vines, or am I wrong?
Some people still are, yes. But they are generally now going on trellises. So, but some people still are, because it's traditional. It's not required by the protocol and to do so, but then it's just a dependence on whether what you find as a cheaper investment, just to plant the vines that way, just a bit more labor to manage them afterwards.
What are the age of the vines? Which
well, in Malta they find Gelosa, which is even 50 years old, and then you find others which are fairly young, 20 years old. These ones I would say are about 20 years old, but there are cases where we don't necessarily always get them from the same place, because we work with the different farmers and we do select. So there are times when we get them from 40-year-old vines, and ideally we get them from the same supplier chain, but you've really got to be able to keep a consistency in quality, and you can't always necessarily just work with perhaps a mediocre quality grape. Now we've actually planted our own in our own estates, because the Gelosa that we get currently comes from 2-3 farmers which we work with. But now we've planted it in our own estate, and soon we've planted it on trellis in our own estate. So in the future we'll be supplying our own grapes for this wine.
Right. This DOK sticker, is that government supplied?
Yes, it is. It is.
And is this this silver thing? Is that to an authentic, like a thing to stop forgeries?
Yes, absolutely. That is supplied by government, and it has a unique type of material which is only supplied in a couple of places around Europe. So you cannot just buy it from anywhere. It is a unique identifying code as well to the wine.
I'll read your back label, because your back label's got a decent description there. A deeply concentrated ruby purple colored wine. I like the way you write colored in English, not American. Very good. Displaying distinct tiers with intense aromas of dried fruits and Amarena cherries, marrying well with new oak barrels flavors of vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg, leaving a very pleasant and lingering off-dry finish. Primus is the first wine ever produced with an Imcadade. Mentioned. The name Primus also represents the first premium Maltese wine to be produced using the indigenous Gelosa grape as the dominant grape variety. It is made from a blend of selected sun-dried Gelosa and Shiraz grapes, bunches carefully laid down to dry after the harvest. The wine produced from these partially raisined grapes is then transferred to our cellars for aging in oak barrels for at least 12 months before being bottled. Primus is a limited edition wine For 28th vintage, only 5,168 bottles were produced. This is bottle number 1,828. Love that. Fun.